Hello and welcome. I'm Vaishali Kohli and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. The White House says a US-backed peace plan promoted by President Donald Trump is good for both Russia and Ukraine. Rejecting concerns it mirrors Moscow's demands, President Zelensky insists any deal must ensure a dignified peace as he meets senior US Army officials in Kyiv. A Russian strike on Zaporizhzhia killed at least 5 people and injured 3 more. Governor Ivan Fedorov said guided bombs hit the city as emergency crews rescued civilians. Meanwhile, Putin visited a frontline command post amid unverified Russian claims of taking Kupiansk. A senior U.S. official says Chinese and Indian banks and refineries are adjusting practices to comply with sanctions on Russian oil and financial flows. Washington says the shift shows tighter enforcement and is changing behavior across Asia. Russia says it has held in-depth talks with China and Moscow on missile defense and strategic stability, agreeing to boost cooperation. The meetings come amid shared concerns over President Trump's planned Golden Dome missile shield and his intent to resume nuclear testing. US President Donald Trump has signed an order removing tariffs on Brazilian imports, including aircraft parts, beef, coffee, and orange juice. The move is welcomed by President Lula and aims to ease trade pressures, support supply chains, and boost economic ties between the US and Brazil. The European Union says it will unveil a new economic security doctrine next month as it prepares a tough trade stance towards China. The shift comes as Germany rethinks its approach, with Brussels reviewing its defense tools amid concerns over rare earths and global geopolitical pressure. China and Kyrgyzstan hold their first ever strategic dialogue focused on security, trade, and regional connectivity. Both sides say they aim to deepen cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative. President Maduro says Venezuela is ready to export gas to Colombia for the first time, as the two countries recently agreed on a binational economic zone to boost trade and energy, with final technical details still being worked out. In the major news from Bangladesh, where an earthquake of magnitude 5.2 shook Bangladesh and West Bengal, several netizens are claiming it was one of the strongest earthquakes they felt. The German Research Center for Geosciences reports the quake occurred at a shallow depth of 10 kilometers, or about 6 miles. Officials are assessing the impact and checking for potential damage and casualties. White House press secretary has said that a U.S. peace plan backed by U.S. President Donald Trump that is being negotiated with Russia and Ukraine is good for both sides, dismissing concerns that it echoes many of Moscow's demands. Listen in.
As always, I'm not going to litigate the details of this plan as it's ongoing and it's in flux, but the president supports this plan. It's a good plan for both Russia and Ukraine, and we believe that it should be acceptable to both sides, and we're working very hard to get it done.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has stated that any deal to end Russia's invasion must bring a dignified peace. This comes as Zelensky has met with senior U.S. Army officials in Kyiv, including U.S. Secretary of the Army Daniel Driscoll. Let's in fact listen in to what Zelensky said.
Ми з перших днів війни займаємо одну надзвичайно просту позицію. Україні потрібен мир. І справжній мир такий, який не зламає третє вторгнення. Достойний мир, щоб умови були з повагою до нашої незалежності, нашого суверенітету, до гідності українського народу. І ми саме такі умови маємо забезпечити.
Meanwhile, Kyiv has stated that it is ready to work constructively with the United States on the proposed plan and that a call between Trump and Zelensky is expected soon. The president's office in Ukraine has also added that it has already received a draft plan from the American side, though it has not revealed the details of the plan. All right, and now I have my guest, Professor Veselin Popovsky, Professor and Vice Dean in the Global Law School, joining me from New Delhi. Now, Professor, of course, my first question to you is, how do you see this conversation between Zelensky and Trump?
I see it positively, as President Zelensky said. Negotiations are important to clarify positions, to look at options, to declare what dignified outcome is very interesting here. But I also assume that what Zelensky means is in respect to international law, territorial sovereignty, political independence. And for that matter, we still need to see those 28 points, but obviously Ukrainians and European Union should be on the table discussing each of those 28 points. There was some leaks in Financial Times and Reuters suggesting that there still could be some territory of Ukraine being conceded. We need to see again that. I assume a possible ceasefire as it stands at the moment, the front line, the battlefield, if that is freezing, if Russia and Ukraine accept to stop the fire, simply as currently the line is, it's acceptable for both sides. Russians don't want to lose any more oil refineries and airports and airplanes. Those Ukrainian hits on Russian targets deep into the Russian territory are obviously reducing Russian military might, and they are very worried about that. And certainly Ukrainians don't like to see every morning some Russian drones and missiles hitting Ukrainian cities and civilian people dead. So on that one, they would agree. They should have agreed 9-10 months ago when Trump first proposed a ceasefire, and Putin, not Ukraine, but Russia, repeatedly rejected all the ceasefire proposals by Donald Trump, supported by Ukraine, for temporary 30-day ceasefire. How many times? 6, 7, 8 times we had those proposals in the past, repeatedly rejected by Moscow. And for me, that's a good news. If Russia finally accepts a ceasefire, it does mean that Russians suffer, their military suffer. Those hits deep into the Russian territory produce finally some acceptance by Moscow to cease the fire. Now, how the long-term peace deal will evolve, we still don't know. It will take some time, but the normal process here is to have a ceasefire, as at the current army should, maybe the current army stay there, but they stop firing at each other. And that could be a good first step, in my opinion.
Professor Popovsky, I'd request you to stay on with me. Now, a Russian strike on the southern eastern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia has left at least 5 people dead and 3 others injured. Regional Governor Ivan Fedorov says the attack came shortly after he warned residents about incoming guided bombs. Emergency crews rushed in to battle fires and pull wounded civilians to safety. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has visited a frontline army command post, receiving updates from top commanders on the war in Ukraine. During the briefing, the commander of Russia's Western Group of Forces, Sergei Kuzylov, claimed that Russian troops have completed the liberation of the eastern Ukrainian city of Kupiansk, a claim that Ukraine has not confirmed. The visit comes as Moscow continues to highlight battlefield gains while the conflict grinds on. and I have Professor Popovsky back with me. Now, Professor, how do you see this conflict progressing?
Well, as we spoke earlier, we hope the conflict will be frozen with the peace plan, but it still needs to be seen. And somehow those hits that Russia does on Ukrainian city continues. Before Zaporizhzhia, we had another horrible tragedy in Thermopylae with 26 people, casualties, civilian casualties there, 3 of them children. So in other words, it's kind of a peculiar that on one hand Russians are talking about peace deal with Donald Trump, but on another hand every day they continue killing civilians and they do nothing else. Russian army doesn't advance. I think the story about Kupiansk or Pokrovsk are absolutely not verified. Very soon after that, we've seen that these cities, which Russia claimed for 7, 8 times they are still not in the Russian hands. So the Russian propaganda works that way. They repeatedly say that they capture some village here and some village there, but days later it becomes obvious that they may have captured, but they lost it 2 or 3 days later. So it doesn't mean anything again in terms of military advantage at all. And for that matter, my argument here earlier expressed is that because Russia cannot do anything on the battlefield, they are stuck. They don't move. They couldn't do what 12 months, 14 months. They announced that project to capture Kupiansk and Pokrovsk, and they did nothing for 14 months in terms of military advance. Now they are trying to get those small pieces of destroyed cities by negotiations, and maybe this is, in my guess, what that plan by Vitkov and Dmitriev is about, that Ukraine may concede Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, which Russians couldn't take with military advance for the last 14 months. And that's, again, I'm a little bit optimistic when I hear that there are negotiations, because at some point there could be a ceasefire, freezing the battlefield, not killing any more civilians. And Ukraine also should stop their missiles and drones reaching deep into the Russian territory. And somehow to get over the winter and sometime in the spring to renew efforts for long-term negotiations. And here will come the other issues potentially in that plan, 28 points, like military weapons, sanctions, territory, and everything else. So it looks like a temporary ceasefire for the winter. If that happens, it's good for the both sides. I repeat that. Ukrainians don't want to lose more civilians. Russians are very scared of losing more oil and gas ports and ships and airplanes and everything that they almost weekly we see Ukrainians successfully hit, and then come back to the negotiation table after that temporary ceasefire, and then in that negotiation go through all other points in the plan that Trump is suggesting. We still need to see those points, but yes, that's how I, at the moment, evaluate that.
I'd like to thank you, Professor Popovsky, for joining me on the broadcast. And now at a United Nations Security Council meeting, Russia has defended its assault on Ukraine, while the United States and Ukraine have pressed for an immediate ceasefire and a viable path to peace. Russia's UN ambassador Vasily Nebenzia has accused President Vladimir Zelensky of enforcing violent mobilization, forbidding retreats, and seeking a ceasefire only to make sure that their defeated forces get a long-awaited breather. Meanwhile, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Mike Waltz has urged all sides to halt the fighting, adding that diplomacy is the only path to achieve peace in the region. He said that Washington has offered Russia generous terms, including sanctions relief, but has warned that civilian casualties continue to mount as Russia presses its attacks. Listen in.
It is imperative to end this war and begin the process of rebuilding. Colleagues, diplomacy is the only path to a durable and just peace. The United States has invested at the highest levels, the President of the United States personally, to end this war. We have proposed generous terms for Russia, including sanctions relief. We have asked Russia to halt its attacks and meet directly with Ukraine to negotiate a peaceful settlement. Fortunately, the fighting continues, tragically causing more civilian casualties.
Now, Ukraine's Deputy UN Ambassador Krygystina Havayshine has highlighted recent Russian attacks on Ukrainian regions. She's also reiterated Ukraine's stance on the war, stating that the only path to ending it is compelling Russia to retreat completely. Let's listen in.
There will never be any recognition, formal or otherwise, of Ukrainian territory temporarily occupied by the Russian Federation as Russian. Our land is not for sale. Ukraine will not accept any limits on its right to self-defense or on the size and capabilities of our armed forces. Nor will we tolerate any infringement on our sovereignty, including our sovereign right to choose the alliances we want to join. There is only one realistic path to ending this war. Russia must be compelled to retreat, economically, politically, and militarily.
Now, the White House has announced a major shift in U.S. trade policy towards Brazil. President Donald Trump has signed an order lifting several sharp tariffs on Brazilian imports, a move which is warmly welcomed by President Lula. The order removes the 40% tariffs previously placed on Brazilian aircraft parts, and it also exempts key agricultural and consumer goods, including beef, coffee, and orange juice. Washington also says that the changes are intended to ease trade pressures and support supply chains across both economies. For Brazil, the tariff removal offers a significant economic boost, especially for its agricultural and aviation sectors. And for the U.S., it marks a recalibration of a trade relationship that has seen tensions rise and fall over the past few years. I have my guest Ross Feingold, political analyst, joining me from Taipei, Taiwan. Now, to begin with, Ross, how do you see White House announcing a major shift in U.S. trade policy towards Brazil?
I'm not sure if it's a major shift. Certainly, the White House has been under pressure over the cost of living, or is the word that people like to use now, affordability issues, or some call it a crisis. Lowering the tariffs on some popular food products will certainly make for good politics for the White House, and people will hopefully be able to buy these goods at a lower pricing point in the coming days and weeks. But the general approach of the Trump administration, as far as using tariffs as a tool to extract trade concessions from trading partners, that is clearly not going to change. President Trump's view on this is well known, and frankly, he views it as successful because of the trade agreements that have been signed with a large number of U.S. trading partners. Some of those agreements include significant investments in the United States, such as by the EU, Japan, and South Korea. So the general policy framework, that's not going to change, even if there are periodic adjustments like we're seeing now with Brazil.
All right, Ross, I'll request you to stay on with me. Now, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum rejects calls for violence during a traditional military parade held in Zocalo, just a few kilometers away from a demonstration, organized by Generation Z to protest against her security policy. This comes as the Mexican police blocked the protesters gathered on Paseo de la Reforma from heading towards Mexico City's Zocalo, where the parade was organized. Let's listen to what the president had to say.
Para unos cuantos, el que convoca a la violencia se equivoca. El que alienta al odio se equivoca. El que cree que la fuerza sustituye a la justicia se equivoca. El que convoca una intervención extranjera se equivoca. El que convoca, saben que no nos vamos a someter a los intereses de quienes antes ostentaban el poder o gozaban de privilegios, ni a ningún gobierno o interés extranjero. Saben que no seremos figuras decorativas.
Now, protesters are marching in Mexico City against President Claudia Sheinbaum's government, demanding action on insecurity, corruption and improvements in education, healthcare and wages.
Uno, para exigir justicia, y dos, que escuchen a los jóvenes. Porque más que nada, yo soy de Zacatecas y te puedo decir que los jóvenes se están acercando más y más al crimen organizado. Yo tuve que irme de Zacatecas a la ciudad, o sea, desde ese punto de vista.
Bueno, yo vengo a la marcha porque la verdad vivimos en una inseguridad que ya es insoportable. Todas las personas que nos venimos a manifestar o que venimos a esta marcha, venimos por un motivo, porque ya no se puede vivir con seguridad parada. Ahora se tiene que dar cuenta el gobierno que no estamos con ningún partido, que nosotros estamos viniendo por nuestros problemas, por nuestra voluntad, por lo que estamos sufriendo. No estamos...
La generación de los jóvenes, que estamos hartos de este gobierno de Morena, pero ya no solamente es la Gen Z, sino son generaciones de adultos mayores, niños, de varias personas que nos unimos por un mismo propósito, salvar a México de este narcogobierno.
I have my guest joining me back on the broadcast, Ross Feingold, political analyst from Taipei, Taiwan. Now, Ross, I want to begin by asking you, how do you see Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum rejecting calls for violence during a traditional military parade held in Zocalo? We've also played out her statement for our viewers.
Clearly, she has a significant domestic political challenge with a public safety crisis. This is not a new issue for Mexico. It's a long-time issue. The power of drug cartels in parts of the country is significant. There's often violence between competing organizations, violence between drug organizations and the security forces. There's a long-time problem with kidnappings, including kidnappings that remain and disappearances that remain unsolved. But her job as president is to solve that issue, but also call on people not to engage in any more violence. Interesting thing is, you have to keep in mind, she was elected with 61% of the vote, which in any democratic election is huge success. So she had high popularity in the election a little over 2 years ago. And her popularity has remained higher. Popularity has typically polled, or her approval rating, even higher than the 61% of the vote that she received. So it seems that most Mexicans are very happy with her leadership, and she's continuing to do or make public policy decisions that she feels is the right thing to do or say, and the public is behind her.
And Ross, Gen Z is also not happy with her security policy and they're protesting against it. What would you like to say on that?
Well, it's certainly easy to get Gen Zs mobilized. We're talking about a generation that uses social media, obviously. So it's easy to mobilize people and come out and protest. But again, I think there might be a bit of a disconnect here because the polls consistently show that the public is happy with her performance as president. So we have to be careful about over-interpreting a relatively small number of protesters. But there are significant issues that President Sheinbaum faces, and if she doesn't deal with them in a way that the public is satisfied, then she will face significant challenges going forward. So this includes the public safety issues, Mexico, like other places, has an affordability crisis, and also trade disputes with the United States going into a period over the next coming months where the U.S., Canada, and Mexico are going to be renegotiating their trade agreement, the free trade agreement. So she certainly has a lot of challenges, notwithstanding the popularity that she's enjoyed over her first 2 years in office.
Thank you, Ross, for joining me on the broadcast. And now, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says that Venezuela is ready to export gas to Colombia for the first time. In mid-June, both Venezuela and Colombia have agreed to create a binational economic zone to boost the production and trade with an emphasis on energy, as the natural gas is already at the border and ready to be delivered to Colombia. Maduro also says that a few technical and economic details are still being finalized before gas exports begin. He also added that the people of Venezuela and Colombia are united and increasingly integrated with more prosperous economy and growing trade as the binational investments grow. Meanwhile, Venezuela's National Assembly has approved a 15-year extension of the joint ventures between state company PDVSA and a unit of Russia's Rosabeth that has operated 2 oil fields in Venezuela's western region. The partnerships may continue operating the Boquerón and Perilla oil fields through 2041 with the goal of producing some 91 million barrels or 16,600 barrels per day of crude, as the total investment is estimated about $616 million. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.